And since they started inviting me to give some of the talks, I've been trying to string the talks together into a sort of series. And the way it works is that I managed to give half a talk on a Tuesday and half a talk on a Thursday. And this talk today, I already made a start last Thursday. And it's on a subject known as Enlightened Living, which is derived from a set of trainings in everyday life, which people can try to master alongside their meditation in a way that will help their meditation to be more successful. They cover every aspect of life. They're known as the 38 blessings of life. Last time on a Thursday, I had the chance to introduce some of these as something known as inner peace education, where these 38 blessings have been incorporated into a sort of school curriculum for values education and taught alongside other more academic subjects in a way that it's hoped that young people will grow up with a sense of integrity and valuing ethics and having at the very least an interest in ethics. Yes. So that was pretty much all about Thailand for those of you who were there last Thursday. And what I'd like to talk about today is some of the principles behind these 38 blessings and why they are worthy of our attention, even outside Thailand in the Western world. So really, we're talking about something known as spiritual knowledge. And to play the devil's advocate, at least for a few minutes, I would like to say that it would probably be much more convenient just to trust the judgment of the majority of educational ministries around the world who are pretty sure that just academic knowledge or material knowledge is plenty for pupils to learn about, and certainly sufficient for them to be able to make their way in the world successfully. As there are many experts who think that students and pupils would be better spending their time focusing on vocational subjects because vocational knowledge will give them a higher salary. And if they have a higher salary, then they will surely be guaranteed to have happiness in life. But if this were really to turn out to be true, then that a full stomach and a place to sleep would be enough to keep a human being happy, then we would be lucky that we wouldn't need to waste our time learning about any sort of spiritual knowledge whatsoever. Yeah? Convinced? Not really? Well, even if we were to overlook the way money and unethical application of the knowledge that our poor children learn in schools creates many threats to society in various forms, it's quite hard to escape the conclusion that conventional education has let us down in certain important respects. And probably the reason that you're here is because that you're not entirely convinced by material arguments or materialist arguments. And there's an increasing number of people who recognize that inside every person, there is something deeper, which is not just about earning a living, but it's searching for answers to more deeper questions in life. Some might call them the eternal questions. A quest for purpose and meaning in life and from the world around us. And if supporting yourself were all there was to life, then how come so many lottery winners have lives that end in misery or tragedy? You know, you can look up all the examples on the internet if you are interested. You know, winning the lottery doesn't ensure happiness in life. So it's an inconvenient truth, but wealth can only ensure physical comfort. And money cannot buy the means to nourish and nurture our mind. Even if you have a degree in philosophy, then that can't protect you against this gnawing feeling of existential angst in the mind. In the ideal world, our system of education would provide us the answers we need for the deeper questions inside us. And maybe that's what that inner peace education project in Thailand was trying to achieve. But generally speaking, the secular education doesn't seem to fill this vacuum which people have in their lives. And maybe even if it were to try, it would fail, because part of that quest is our motivation to look for ourselves, to motivate our own education and acquire that knowledge for ourselves. So we're forced to look to spiritual knowledge to get that sort of transformative power to upgrade our own sort of sense of meaning for the future of our own lives. And it's possible that educators are afraid to delve deeper into spiritual knowledge because they suspect it will open the door to lots of sort of gullible or uncritical belief systems that are superstitious nonsense. And when such a variety of things can affect our spiritual progress, it might be people, it might be objects, it might be attitudes or situations or experiences. Who's to be the judge of which are reliable and which are not? For most phenomena of a spiritual nature, their worth or their uselessness is just a matter of opinion. How can you get beyond hearsay or opinions and be sure that the spiritual knowledge will have a universally uplifting effect on people's lives? The dilemma is comparable to maybe a more contemporary phenomenon of branding. I don't mean like branding cattle, I mean like trademarks and that sort of thing, where brands are constantly vying to become universally acceptable or as status symbols. So to give an example, if you got a Mercedes or if you got Adidas trainers, then they are very sought after brands, or at least they used to be. In Asia, if your family can get their first Benz, then you feel that you have somehow arrived in polite society. And it's true that these days the desirability might have shifted slightly. I think the top 10 these days includes Ferrari and Apple more. Because surprise, surprise, brands go in and out of fashion. So we shouldn't be surprised by this, because even heroes go in and out of fashion these days, as you've seen from the tearing down of statues in various public places recently. People want to spend their money on things that they can associate themselves with because they think it improves their own worth to be seen wearing or using those brands. Pretty incredible, really, right? But it only works because that brand or whatever has some sort of enduring or unchanging perception of quality about it. I imagine people who get themselves tattooed with something have to think pretty carefully about why they want to get a tattoo in order that it makes their life somehow better. Because once you got it, then you're stuck with it, right? So in that person's mind, they're thinking through, what am I going to get as my tattoo that it's going to sort of make me happier afterwards and not to be seen as ridiculous by my friends or whatever. People still think about these sorts of things, presumably quite carefully. So in the old days, they might have framed it more as, how can I overcome anything that's going to cause me bad luck in life? But if we take the long view, then we find that from age to age, it's pretty hard to find anything, whether it's brands or heroes or tattoos, that don't go out of fashion. That one. And in times gone by, ancients realized the changeability in the things that they valued. And they would call them not brands, but they would call them blessings. And they would be things that they like to have or to associate themselves with as a way of highlighting their worth or of somehow attracting progress in their lives. And these sort of things in the slide anyway are probably what we would recognize more as what we'd understand by a blessing. Lucky horseshoes or four-leaf clovers. Okay, today we might regard these things with, a little bit of a pinch of salt, but in olden times, the role of such charms was much more significant. Now, we are much more sophisticated now, of course. But systems of spiritual knowledge, since ancient times, there have been attempts to model the values of the world in a way that's more substantial than just those lucky charms, and to try to get deeper to what might be unchangingly lucky or a blessing in a person's life. Things that are reliable and things that don't differ from one person to the next. And it's a Buddhist story I'd like to tell today of how this came into being, these 38 blessings or marks of a person's life going in a better direction. And they're interesting because they originated about 2,500 years ago in India, where there was a group of people asking these sorts of questions, and they were wondering whether there was anything enduring behind the fashions. Were there blessings that transcended fashion that could allow a person to have a life without obstacles? Suppose you wanted to have wealth or honor or praise or happiness. How could you ensure that you attracted those qualities into your life? And in the ensuing debate, everyone had a different point of view. But to generalize, there were three groups of debaters. And the first group thought that the thing to make one's life a blessing was to see something that was pleasing. So if you captured a glimpse of that thing, then it's going to turn your life around into something better. The second group believed it was hearing something, maybe a particular sacred word on the breeze or a particular piece of music. If you heard it and it was pleasing, then that was the thing to turn your life around for the better. And there was a third group that looked a little bit deeper, and they thought that it wasn't the external perceptions that mattered, it was the effect it had on your mind. So it could be something you saw, it could be something you heard, but if it had a pleasing effect on your mind, then that was the thing that made it a blessing. So they had a long discussion, and they couldn't get a conclusion out of this until eventually the whole problem was referred to the Buddha. Because obviously one person's pleasing music might be the neighbor's sort of bane, especially if it is a late night party. So the debate went on, and it was referred to the Buddha, and the answer the Buddha gave for what is enduring in the sort of thing that will predict or attract fortune and blessing into a person's life was something known as the Mangala Sutta, the discourse on blessings. And he talked about not one or two things, but in fact a total of 38, which he divided into 10 groups of things on 10 levels. So this is a picture of them referring the question to the Buddha. So we need to explain how knowledge, or more precisely the habits inspired by that knowledge, can change a person's life for the better. Because we're not sort of into superstitions here. We're not into magic. And you can compare the way things might work in a person's life to change or transform what they are or what they experience to be rather like a working computer, which has both software and hardware. The hardware of a computer is the wiring and the circuitry, while the software is the code that you install on the computer. And although the hardware is generally neutral, what makes the difference between a beneficial or a harmful computer would be the sort of software installed on it. If you install productivity software, then the computer can be used for something useful. But if you install violent games or viruses or malware on the computer, then it becomes a threat to anything it's connected to. So the worth of the computer depends more on the software than on the hardware. Yes? Even if you look at a drinking glass, it's also neutral. What makes the difference between a beneficial cup of something and something that is scary is the sort of drink that you put in it. So if you put nourishing milk or something in the glass, then it will be welcomed by everybody. However, if it's poison in the glass, then immediately it's eyed with suspicion. So the worth of it, even a drinking glass, depends on the content, not on the hardware. And in the same way, our human being has two important parts to it. The part we can see, the physical part, the body, and the other part which we can't see, which we are working with when we try to meditate, which is known as the mind, or you might think of it as the awareness or the attention. Everything else, the blood, the bones, muscles, even our brain, is part of the physical aspect of ourselves. Meanwhile, the mind means the knowledge and the attitudes that constitute our awareness. It's almost like the ghost in the machine. So the physical part of ourself, we may look different, but basically what we have, physically speaking, is neutral. But the difference between people, especially when it comes to how their life is going to go, is to do with the software, to do with what's in their mind, especially the sort of habits generated by what is in their mind. So unfortunately, the software of human beings doesn't come factory pre-installed, but we come into this world without a great deal of software. And how we get that knowledge or the content of our mind, well, that's what we spend our early years doing. We need to learn as much as we can to fill the gaps in our knowledge so that we can navigate life successfully. And our subsequent pathway through life depends on the sort of knowledge that we pick up. It's not just the more the better, but it depends on the sort of knowledge as well. Sometimes we might fill ourselves up with a lot of positive outlook on life, which generally will predict a better future for ourselves. However, if we fill ourselves up with a lot of negativity, especially the sort of things that you could call sort of lies to yourself, when you're lying to yourself or lying to your soul, then that might end up being harmful not only to yourself, but to others around you as well. So there is values in the knowledge. It's not just any knowledge will do. So we learn from the things around us, but we learn especially from the people around us and the sort of knowledge that is exemplified by people who are close to us. And the sort of knowledge which is described as positive, which would predict a good future for us, are contained in these 38 blessings I'm trying to describe. There's 10 levels to them, but the first set of blessings concerns the acquisition of what's known as discretion, which means the ability to tell the difference between something beneficial and something harmful. Because even if someone is knowledgeable, but if their discretion is faulty, then they are likely to get themselves in some sort of trouble. If they get in with the wrong sort of people, then that will be the sort of habits and knowledge that will brush off on them. So in this first group at the bottom of the screen there, turning our back on old bad habits is to do with often the sort of people we choose to associate with or that we have as our friends, because that will be the source of most of our knowledge and assumptions about the world. So we need to be careful about the sort of people who are close to us, or at least what we let brush off on us from those sort of people. The second group concerns the consolidation of the goodness in our own habits and outlook on the world, especially recognizing the good habits we already have in ourselves and establishing a proper aim in life. The third group of blessings, moving up to the third level there, is to do with how we can make a contribution to society by our skillfulness. So being able to stand on our own 2 feet in terms of earning our living and avoiding becoming a burden on others in society. Fourth level is to do with, after we're able to help ourselves stand on our own 2 feet, what we can do to help other people close to us, for whom we are responsible, whether it be our family or our parents. And divide our time skillfully between work life and home life. The fifth level says they're becoming a pillar of society, to do with helping beyond our own home and beyond our own family to become more of a person who gives something back to society, which becomes possible once you've got your own life in order. Beyond that, we start to come to levels 6 up to 10, which are to do with working with the mind directly. But the logic of these 38 blessings is that if your life is, you haven't got your own life in order yet, it's very hard to work constructively with the mind, because there's going to be so much turmoil in there. So, how does this system measure up to other ethical systems? There are a lot of advantages that come from these 38 blessings in terms of the logic of the ethics which they use. But I picked out 10 of the things which recommend it as a system to guide us when we're thinking about things in an ethical way. The first of the qualities of this system is that it's progressive and sequential, because they are arranged according to difficulty in the way they are practiced. They start out with very basic things which even a child might understand, and things like, let's say, social graces, and then they work gradually towards more inward or more subtle aspects, which also are further up the staircase of cultivation or self-mastery. For example, if you start off with the basic one, it will lead automatically to the ones further along the sequence. So in a sense, you could jump in anywhere on this sort of staircase of 38 blessings, and whatever step you start on, it will lead you up to the next one. So it may be that you have only one redeeming quality, but if it's one of the 38, then it will lead you to all the other qualities. The second feature is it's self-catalyzing, which means that once you have one of the qualities, then it will energize the other ones to come into being more easily. Let's say you have not too many redeeming qualities, except perhaps being nice to your parents, but that is a blessing. And out of that goodness, you start to recognize the goodness in other people around you as well, which will lead you into other ones of the 38 blessings much more easily. But you need to have at least one to start off with. And they're fairly exhaustive. They deal with personal issues, they deal with relational issues, they deal with social issues, they even deal with economic and political issues. So for one set of virtues, it covers a huge variety of different scenarios and situations where ethics need to be applied. Fourth feature is they're fairly holistic. They deal not with causes or effects, but they include both. Sometimes we have rather linear thinking about good, bad, polarities. But with blessings, it's a very odd sort of logic, because the means also is the end. If a certain blessing, let's say, we go back to the example of being nice to your parents, not only is that a good end product, but it's also something that predicts greater things in the future. It is a blessing in itself. So not only does it bring good things into existence, it is a good thing in and of itself. So means ends is not such a great. There's not such a separation between the two. You won't get confusing ethical issues like the end justifying the means, for example, where you do nasty things in order to get a good outcome. That doesn't exist, because with blessings, you're doing nice things anyway, and the outcome is also nice. A fifth feature is that they are multi-level, covering many levels of life. And the sixth feature is they don't discriminate between, let's say, lay practice and monastic practice. They don't discriminate between males and females, children and adults, but they are things which anyone can take away and practice and get some benefit from. Some features, they work with multifactorial logic. And an eighth feature is that they facilitate a fairly practical outlook. I don't know if any of you have tried studying Buddhism in various other places and found some of it sort of fairly dry or perhaps impractical. Some places are rather guilty of that. But if you start with 38 blessings as a sort of portal into understanding aspects of Buddhist values, you find that everything is immediately things that you can take away and practice in your life. It's not like a philosophy, it's not like a set of ideals, but it's things which are to do with habits and things that we come across in our everyday lives in a very practical way. So it keeps it real. Ninth feature is that they lead up to transcendental values. So it's not just the moral principles or the intention behind the actions, but rather the sense of uplifting society on all levels, from the individual, family, education, community, spirituality, to raise them all up to a higher level through the practice of these 38 values. And lastly, opposites are very clearly highlighted, because not only does it talk about virtues or values or good ethics, but it also makes it fairly clear what happens when those are lacking, or what the flip side or the opposites of those ones are as well. So you can see where things are definitely not a blessing, but they are creating serious problems for, let's say, society or for an individual. That becomes very clearly apparent as well. So you can see the flip side, where something is a bad omen for society, for example, simply by its existence. So these are how the 38 blessings are formed up into a sort of system. And the ideal way to practice these is, in the short term, maybe you need to work with sort of regulations to prevent you slipping into things that are contrary to the blessings. So that would be why you have things like rules and precepts, to sort of help you get familiar with things which you need to avoid, where you don't need to use too much reasoning. Later on, as you become more familiar with them, you start to educate yourself to see the benefits of aligning yourself with them, rather than simply being do's and don'ts. Later on, you start to make them into your habits, you start to internalize them more. And later on still, maybe you're able to network to those around you with the same sort of logic as well. But that's how that ideally would be practiced. So what I'm going to do over the next few talks, and as there are 38 of them, you can imagine they give quite a lot of room for talks in the future. I will go through from the most basic ones first, and as I said, give a half a talk each time together with some meditation. The next one, which I will start to deal with, is avoiding people who have a negative influence on our future, who are referred to as fools, probably rather euphemistically in Buddhism. And I'll start to talk about that, I think, next Thursday. Yes. So for this time, I think I will finish off there. But I don't know if you have questions on Tuesdays. Yes.
Ooh. I'll ask on, if I may.
Okay, yes, go.
With regards to the charms,
Yes.
and the trinkets as such, how far does that include religious objects? And I'm talking about things like perhaps rosary beads or crosses.
All the things you see surrounding our meditation hall. The thing which this system I'm trying to describe for you, the way it works, is it uses the same words, but it talks more about the habits that go along with these objects. So let's say you have an amulet, or you have a religious object which inspires you. It's the inspiration part that would be the important thing in that case, that would predict the way your future is going to go. So the ones in the slide are not ones I think that would be helpful habit-wise here. But let's say you have a religious object which inspires you to, let's say, be patient in the face of adversity because you feel, you're being protected. It might just be a feeling, but it gets you through that adversity. That would be a blessing. But the blessing lies not in the object per se, it lies in the fact you're being patient. Whatever it takes to give you that patience, well, that's a blessing. And so it's how you interpret it. And some of those religious objects, they come into the system of 38 blessings because if you celebrate something worthy, that is seen as a blessing. So you give special attention to someone who is an exemplar of, let's say, great self-sacrifice. Having examples like that in society, it's inspiring, and that is a blessing for society. Yeah.
Thank you. Anybody else? No? Did that inspire anyone to ask a question?
Do you know what the Dhammapada is, folks? There's a lot of Buddhist scriptures. Some parts are easier to read than others, and hence more popular. Some parts are almost like a poetry, one of which is the Dhammapada, and it's become quite popular for that reason. But because the Dhammapada is so succinct, it tends to not expand very much on the detail. The place where this set of teachings I'm talking about this evening came from is a different part of the scriptures, which is more like prose, I guess you might say. But like the Dhammapada, it only makes sense when people expand on it and interpret it and fill out the details, often with illustrative stories to really, for it to make sense to us 2,000 years later on in a way that we can relate to. So most of what I will talk about, the parts I think that will appeal to you at least, will be the illustrations of the little headings which are passed down in the original teachings. Yeah.
Okay.
Well, if you don't have questions for me, I have some questions for you.
Oh.
At least for anyone who hasn't done the survey yet. But anyone who wouldn't mind spending about 10 minutes filling in a survey about meditation experiences and the sort of benefits it brings you in relation to stress and anxiety and whatever. If you could fill in one of these, either now or just take it home with you and bring it back next time. And that would be very welcome, in order to try to be a little bit more. See if it's enough. I think a few people have already done it already. And yes, to try to figure out how long does it take for meditation to kick in your life in order to bring benefits that you can start to notice. Yes. Of course, your stress levels might go through the roof the moment you see the survey. So, in which case, you have to fill it in at the time when you're feeling calmest. Yes. Ideally, for this survey, we would have divide you in half, and half of you we would not teach meditation to for 6 weeks. And the other half, we allow you to meditate for 6 weeks, and then we compare the two groups. But we're not so cruel. And you could then be a control group. But for the moment, I'm comparing the people who just started meditation with the ones who've been doing it for 6 weeks. So there's a little thing to fill in how long you've been meditating for. Still no questions? Well, if you are shy in front of all the other people, I'm around anyway, in case anyone wants to ask anything without everyone else hearing.
In that case, can we please pay respect to our teaching monk by bowing 3 times? Bow. Bow. Bow.
So may all of you enjoy health, happiness, success, and prosperity in life, and be inspired to follow the journey of inner peace without end until entering upon the utmost peacefulness inside.
Please pay respect to the Lord Buddha by bowing 3 times.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Hope you enjoyed the session. Safe journey home. If it's still light outside, you might want to view the garden before you go.